these themes of stasis and fracture come up like, yeah, like it's weirdly
Yeah.
across all levels of description. Um, how long have you been, like, do you remember where you started thinking? I guess I'm going to try to kind of transition us
Yeah.
into talking about your path, but like, do you remember when you started thinking in these terms? Because this has been this very interesting, a lot of our dialogue has been about this, and I'm wondering where that like started for you.
I don't know. I've always been like really interested in stuff and like our like where we are in the world, like from being a kid, like in history or prehistory and stuff like that. And like I was always really interested, and then I was really interested in philosophy as well and stuff like that. So I've always been thinking about these things in a way, but to see it that way, I think that happened. Yeah, that happened actually after like a transitionary experience a bit, like to see to see this as a problem, this tension between like the concrete and the abstract and the fixity and the flow and the chaos. You know, I don't know, to
Yeah.
that fell into place after like a experience with yeah, with shrooms as well,
Okay.
and shrooms and nature and all
Yeah.
that good stuff. Yeah, and and then it was like like an integration process. No, it wasn't like, oh yeah, I that was what I thought in this moment. It was like a feeling, and then I started thinking about it, or I started like reading stuff that I somehow felt like, oh, that's kind of reflecting what I felt or what I'm feeling, what I'm, yeah,
Yeah, okay.
yeah.
Okay. So, so let's like trace, however, in whatever like scale of detail you feel interested in, but let's kind of like trace your journey up to that point.
Hmm?
Um, just starting with, because I feel like that's a very specific, and I would say kind of like highly developed sense of like form of awareness about like what the world is like and why it is this way and not some other. And with all these interviews, I'm trying to just get a general sense because so many people, I'm trying to understand why some people are even aware that the world is in crisis and that there isn't a system in place to fix it while so many people just don't really seem, if they're aware of it, they don't integrate it in any way. They're not like responsive to that reality in any way I can see. So like, what you grew up in Germany? Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, right. I grew up
And
in Germany.
and like,
Um,
do you remember thinking about when you were a kid, you said you thought about kind of like the human trajectory, like you thought about prehistory and sort of like how we got
well,
here.
precisely not that much. More like, yeah, archaeology and stuff like that. Like, yeah, I was interested in in dinosaurs, no, like like small kid, and you learning about all that stuff, and yeah, in general, like science interested,
Okay.
like space as well and stuff like that. So yeah, I grew up in Germany in like a um middle class household. I
Okay.
would say like father did like tax advising, and my mother is an accountant. And um, yeah, I guess I was always like a really like sensitive kid in a way. Like I don't know, I was always like that kid that was really easy to like make, or get into his head, into his own worlds, like make it like stories. I read a lot. I read a lot of stories, and like yeah, I was like that, and I don't know, and like I feel like like in high school, I felt I went to high school in Leverkusen, which is the place where Bayer is, like the big chemical company
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
that bought Monsanto,
Yep.
and the school I went to, like most of the kids were like kids of like high people in that company, or like chemists and engineers and stuff like that. And you kind of noted that as well in the curriculum. It was like really like, like,
Yeah.
yeah, we got this figured out. Like,
Yeah.
we're the scientists. We and um and I've always been like the most in my group of friends that I had. I was always the most like, I don't know, like left kind of guy, like the most left guy. And I also grew the beard like the latest, the last.
Oh, okay. All right.
According to you, that's there's a connection there, I
Totally.
guess. Yeah,
Totally.
yeah. No, I guess like from an empathic level, I was always interested in what's going on in the world, and like what's going on in other places in the world, how that relates to what we are doing. And yeah, I I was interested in that, and I saw that, but I didn't have like friends, like leftist friends or anything like that. So I was developing that like in my own reading and stuff like that until like when I was 18 or something. I went to my first like protest thing. It was like the G8 summit in Germany. It was like a big thing with all
What year?
the it must be like 2007 or something like that.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think it was.
So that was kind of
Yeah.
still back when there was like a lot of momentum for that kind of protest, the like summit circuit or whatever.
Yeah. It was like the anti-capitalist
Yeah.
thing, the anti-globalization thing, and
Yeah.
that. And I was like, oh yeah, I don't know. I was like, I was into reading about political stuff, and I didn't have friends in that scene, so I was like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna go there and just gonna check it out. And yeah. And I I remember being like the typical like, oh yeah, I don't like violence. Violence is like really bad, no? Like,
Uh-huh.
um and I remember like the first day there was like the big like opening march kind of thing in the city of Rostock, and they were like, it was huge. They were like 5,000 like black bloc people,
Yeah,
and
right.
and like from all of Europe, like Italians and Greek people, and and all the good stuff. And it turned like into chaos in the middle of the city, like really fast. I think it's weird because it was like my first protest thing, and it gave like a like a really bad impression of how it goes, because you saw a lot of like police running away from people because there was so much stuff flying through
Totally,
the air that they
totally.
just like had to like retreat. And I don't know, like every bank in the city got smashed, and like it was like a huge chaos. They had to get in like a lot of like water cannons and stuff like that. Yeah. And then the summit started, and the blockade started, and I just like went to the meetings for the peaceful blockades and stuff like that. And we did like sitting blockades where the people would arrive. And then I kind of like saw how police acts for the first time. And it was like, oh, okay, yeah. So all those stories about police that they told me, they they're not trustable. Yeah, it was like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, so there are like a lot of people just enjoying what like violence. And yeah, I just like, I really fastly understood that, I don't know, that you can't like just leave the violence to the bad guys. Kind of like, you just see that it's for them, it's easy to use it. And I don't know. Yeah. So that was that thing. And then I got a little bit into like anti-fascist activism, but not like really organized. I was just going from thing to thing, kind of. Yeah. So I
Okay.
was always like interested in politics, but I never had like a network or anything. Like I had some friends that sometimes went with me or something like that. Yeah. So there was that. And um, where to go from there. So mm, that was always like focused on like anti-capitalist thinking though. Like
Sure.
there was never like an ecologist thing. There was like about people and like yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so that came later. I would say yeah, that came later. And yeah, I don't really know where to go from here. Maybe um
Well, yeah, I mean, that seems like I think it's one of the things that I wonder about people experiencing, which I guess ties in just kind of generally to our ongoing dialogue about abstraction versus concrete experience, is how much people are capable of developing pretty elaborate models of how the world works and what are like viable and meaningful forms of political engagement versus what is like unacceptable childish nonsense. And then I cannot count the number of times that I've been in some large scale mobilization and people who have spent, in some cases, literally decades in their heads thinking this is how the world works, had their illusions shattered in a like, you know, with like two swings of a baton or whatever, right? And the extent
yeah.
to which our world mostly consists of people who just haven't had one of those experiences, who've never really tested their models of like what power is and what the dynamics of power in our society are against any kind of effort that they've made to shift anything at all, and how I just really feel like
Yeah.
half the conversations happening on the internet would shut down immediately if it was like everybody, instead of traveling around for a year backpacking or whatever, was for, at some point, if there was some kind of practical experience that, I mean, you could do this in high school where it's like, okay, get your city council to change something, just any kind of like actual immersive experience in a concrete effort to do anything, to shift any aspect of the power landscape. And we just don't, there's nothing in science that, like, this is something I keep noting, how there's no scientific discipline that requires a kind of field work where you actually try to like do anything politically. It's like if you want to have opinions about chimpanzee aggression or hunter-gatherer exchange protocols, you have to actually go into the field and observe these things. But then
Yeah.
scientists are supposed to make these declarations about how like power and society's politics work without ever like immersing themselves in these, which I think is like probably not a I don't think that's entirely accidental or anything. And
Mm,
yeah, and so that's I think one of the, as I try to do these interviews for the sake of constructing some kind of like model
yeah.
of what distinguishes people who kind of had this set of realizations, that seems like it's going to be a big one over and over again. I frequently find myself thinking that if I could just communicate one thing to people who are kind of like watching all this happen from the outside, it would just be the feeling of shaking hands with a congressperson or a senator here in the United States and just kind of seeing the look in their eyes and realizing that we're about to have a meeting about stuff that they just don't understand. That it's not even that we're on different sides of some ideological spectrum, but that they don't know about this stuff, and that it's not like a lack of information per se. It's like something really fundamental in their kind of being that just doesn't have really like the scope for the sort of
Just
like,
doesn't overlap. It's just yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, so that's
Yeah.
interesting. I think that crystallizes that. It gives me a sense that that should be sort of like something we formally integrate into these questions, is like, have you had like a directly disillusioning experience with the way power works or something? Have you been like disappointed or appalled by some way that you saw this system
Yeah.
working? But so at this point, so at the time that you're doing this kind of like you're having these experiences of like the sort of like classic those classic 2000s kind of like
Hmm.
economic summit mobilizations and the
Hmm.
anti-fascist sort of like sporadic conflict oriented
Yeah,
approach to politics, like where to what age does that take you? And then
that's a good question. It's like 20, 25. No,
okay,
I mean the summit thing was like that was like 19, and
18,
then
19,
like
okay.
25 until 25 or something like that. Maybe yeah, and then maybe maybe what like we can like here go into more like psychological stuff that like went on parallel because it like I said that I went there like alone like and I didn't have like the
A
like a
network.
network and
Yeah.
stuff like that and that was like a thing psychologically in myself that always has been that thing that I never felt like really connected with a lot of people. Like I have like some really good friends, but then I yeah I'm alone a lot and I always had problems connecting with people.
So yeah, I felt like I found myself wanting to ask about that when you were describing even growing up, how you did say you had a group of friends, but it also sounded like you felt aware of being different.
Yeah, I think that's it. Because I always had people around, but it was always like with a little distance in a way, because I
Yeah,
felt like different in some ways, so interested in different things, so I saw things differently or something like that. Yeah, it was kind of like the typical metalhead, like
right.
uh and yeah, I think I felt alone a lot, like when I was growing up, when I in my like 18s and or something like that. And yeah, I think maybe that goes back to family stuff as well. I think like in our family we there's not there's never been like a close emotional
Like
connection
intimacy.
with any like like I grew up in like a functioning family, but it was like this like I don't know, like typical like after World War II, like I don't know, like
Yeah.
with everything's going fine and like my father was like a real workaholic. He spent like all his time at work because he didn't wanted to be involved in family, I guess. My mom was like really depressed and had like panic attacks and anxiety attacks and stuff like that. But and they didn't have a close connection to each other and neither to the kids, and they tried to compensate that with like materialistic things as well, like like this kind of thing. And yeah I um and I think that like growing up with my mom, that there's some genetic stuff involved as well, that she has anxiety and depression, and I have that
Yeah.
tendency as well, like to get depressed or anxious. And yeah, and a lot of my like growing up was like that, like feeling alone. I had I had problems to connect with women.
Yeah.
Um um yeah, and I just felt alone, and I was like, I don't know, yeah. Some I like I don't know, with like 20 or something, I started to smoke a lot of weed. Like it helped me in a way, like
Sure.
the at that point I was like depressed in that way that weighs a lot on you. Like I don't know, like
Yeah, like the sense of
nothing's
heaviness.
fun. Like everything, like
Yeah.
this anhedonia and like yeah, everything like just like heavy, and that lifted that off a little bit, and I started like to do more stuff, like to travel again and like to get more involved with people and yeah, yeah, that
So
kind of stuff.
so like your mother had experienced anxiety and depression, but you would say like generally you guys wouldn't talk about that necessarily. It's not like you're having conversations about her interior life or
No,
anything.
no, not really. No,
Yeah.
no. In part because she's she finds it really hard to talk about her interior life. I guess that's like
Yeah.
kind of a problem as well. Like, yeah, but yeah.
And
Mm,
and do you feel like that? I mean, I think that there's always this question about like with stuff like this, it's like, well, what direction does the arrow of causation point? But do you feel like those experiences kind of shaped a more observant nature in you or a more like thoughtful nature or one that was, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I think so. I think so as well. Like, but I also think that it got me into like a kind of like feedback loop and that kind that mm, when I was young, always learned that I can reach my goals by using my head, kind of like
yeah,
by thinking about that stuff, by thinking about stuff. But then when it comes to emotions or romantic relations or just like connecting with people, it's not something that like works that you can get to work through thinking. It's like more inhibitive,
right.
you know, and
Yeah.
so it gets you more anxious and you get like trapped in that thing that you're trying to like yeah get out of your thinking by thinking more kind of you know like you know what I mean like
Yeah.
and I think that made me really like removed in a way from the world. I would say in a way because I think I was a lot in my head, probably also like in a way lost a bit the connection with my body. You know, I didn't wasn't doing a lot of sport or anything. Just like
Yeah,
just
I
like that dynamic.
I definitely feel very familiar with that process of like that kind of hall of mirrors effect where you feel like there's some like distortion in your thinking, some problem that you know, some like error in information processing that's like cascading out through your whole kind of like
Yeah,
affect and like way of relating to the world and you're trying to fix it and the way you're trying to fix it is with more of the same like
yeah,
kind of like hyper rational like logical interaction that
yeah.
the problem
I,
consists of in the
yeah.
first place. Yeah.
I think I think it part I've always been like aware of that process in a way like I don't know um how to say that like I got into meditation really early with like 16 I think
Oh,
because of
okay.
that because I felt like I was like getting a lot in my into my head or I think my interest for art for painting comes from that as well because it gets me out of the thinking process into like another modality kind of and uh, and also like after high school I was really good in like this philosophy and math kind of at the same time and art as well but I already felt that I couldn't like become a philosopher or like become a mathematician or anything because that would like just I don't know like just have me trapped up there you know what I mean like
Yeah, totally.
I yeah and I think I always was looking also for like ways to get out of my head like I got into like how is it called like long distance like trekking you know like with a friend and just like with a backpack and a
Yeah.
tent and just like walking a lot that helped a lot with just like yeah
Yeah.
just like walking it out kind of yeah. Mm,
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's something. There's really quite a few points of overlap between my our respective experiences of early life, but that was definitely one that kind of like recurred over and over again was a sense like I would be on some quest to fix some element of my like I would be involved in like something really high up in a hierarchy of like metacognition, like, oh, I have a problem. Okay, I'm trying to fix the problem. Oh, there's something wrong with the way I'm fixing this problem. Let me ascend another level in this metacognitive hierarchy and fix the way I'm trying to fix the problem and just fucking hall of mirrors style, like just hyper self-referential sort of like emotional and psychological tumult. And sometimes I would get like very lost in that stuff. And then at the same time, there would just be these moments. I remember at one point we emailed about this, about like the sense that like that there's like an internal tug of war,
Mm.
and then you just drop the rope. You're just like,
Yeah,
I'm just gonna cease this fucking dialogue.
yeah,
And
yeah,
there's
yeah.
something that you're
Mm.
totally certain you have to resolve before you can engage in life. And then all of a sudden you just
Just
stop that process and
yeah,
like, no, I'm just gonna go do something. I'm gonna go like
yeah.
actually have an experience. And I can remember that feeling of sometimes just like it was like shedding these infinite number of layers of mediation or whatever. And there was the sunset, and it's
Yeah,
like everything becomes very like real and like, right, here it is.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that was happening. So you found yourself kind of having those experiences. I mean, I'm not presuming that they're entirely resolved, but that like you were really like those experiences like really characterized this whole phase we're talking about up through like your late teens, your early mid 20s kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, up to late 20s. Yeah, 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 kind of. Yeah,
And so
yeah.
then so I guess then there's like these two, I mean, maybe they're related and maybe they're not, but there's this question of kind of like when did your worldview expand, or however we want to phrase it, to encompass a kind of like an ecological dimension?
Mhm.
And have you experienced any major changes in this kind of hall of mirrors
Yeah,
feedback process that is so easy for us to get into?
yeah. So, so yeah, I was like half depressed, not knowing what to do with my life. Kind of.
Sure.
So it's like, I might just start to study again, like, and so I started studying in Oakland in the what's it called, California
Is it like Laney
College
Community
College
College?
no
Oh,
College of Arts,
yeah,
like a
yeah.
small arts
California
college.
College of Arts. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and I studied there a year and working um yeah, the whole like work situation with the and the living situation, it was kind of crumbling down, like the money was getting worse, and yeah, the personal situation as well. And it's like, oh fuck, I'm just gonna let it go, because it was a lot of money to study as well. And so after a year I let it go. I was like really like, oh fuck, what I'm gonna do. I was still like a little bit depressed, didn't know like what to do. And and some friend was like, oh yeah, when you come home, like I also didn't have a lot of money left. So um I was like, yeah, why don't you hitchhike east, like to New York or whatever, and catch the flight there. It's cheaper, and you, I don't know, you get out a little bit kind of.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh well, I might. So I did that. And I
I
I
have to ask, what
yeah,
route did you take? This is just like pure
yeah,
hobo
yeah,
curiosity.
okay. Yeah, it was so it was kind of weird. I went to North California, then
Yeah,
crossed over in Lake Tahoe.
sure.
Then in Nevada, I got picked up by somebody from Montana. I went all the way to Montana.
Yeah.
Then I went to Colorado. I don't know. I somehow ended up in Iowa. And from there, I got like straight east to Indiana. And yeah,
Cool.
kind of, yeah. So, so yeah, I traveled quite a bit before, but I have, well, alone, not so much, a bit as well. Yeah. I hitchhiked a bit before, also alone, but I didn't sleep outside a lot alone
Yeah.
in the woods, kind of. So that was kind of new, and I think that like kind of primed me as well, like at that time, because like you get more attuned to like animal tracks, animal noises. I don't know. Here in Europe, we don't have really anything that can do anything to you. Maybe a ball if you like,
Right.
but not really. You know, like but in Northern California, I mean, that's like mountain lions and bears and stuff like that, supposedly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, so that was kind of frightening first, like the first nights. Um, and yeah, I had some shrooms with me, and then I went because I never seen redwoods, and everybody was like, "Yeah, you gotta see the redwoods." So I went to what's it called, Humboldt State Forest, or
Sure.
Humboldt,
Yeah. Yeah.
or something like that. Yeah, Avenue of the Giants, something like that.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's
yeah,
right on
yeah,
Highway
yeah.
101.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. And I stayed a few days there, and there one day I took the shrooms,
Sure.
and yeah, and it was like, I don't know, like it was like I wanted to go for a walk, but then it was kind of a lot of shrooms. So I was like, oh no, I'm gonna get back to my hammock and lay down. And the trip was a lot about, like, I remember looking down and at the forest floor, like how your brain filters out all those small movements, but when you're on psychedelics,
Yeah.
it doesn't, and you see like how like everything around you is alive and moving, and there's like bugs literally like every fucking where, and yeah, I think from there it went into like thoughts of things about like a trip about like death a little bit, like about like disintegrating and being eaten up by all these bugs
Sure.
that will happen someday,
Sooner
and
or
like,
later. Yeah.
yeah, and it would, yeah, and that I think that happens a lot, like with psychedelics, that you have like this encounter with death, or like dialogue with death, and then it loses a bit of its
Yeah.
power over you, I guess. No, so and then I remember like the really like impressive thing was like after the being in the hammock and tripping was like, I was like, okay, I'm feeling better, I'm gonna go for a walk. And I went into this like grove, like old wood grove, still like a little tripping, but not really. But it was like suddenly this like feeling of, okay, I have to trace back a little bit, because like before, when I had these phases of depression and like anxiety and in general this feeling of being alone and disconnected, I there was always like, or a lot of that was accompanied like by images, and like images of like being outside of the world, like literal,
Yeah.
like being like an astronaut floating like above Earth, like the uh,
Yeah.
Earth down there, and during the trip, it was like suddenly, when I was in the grove, it was like this feeling of being like involved in life, like it's like all around you, and it's like a womb or something, like it embraces you in a way, like this feeling of like all around me, having this complexity that, like, I don't know, like in the red was like everything is like, I don't know, you feel that everything is alive, like
Yeah.
you smell it, and yeah, and yeah, there was there was this feeling, yeah, of coming like into the world, and from, like, yeah, and then also this like feeling of being alone dropped away. Like the other day, I listened to the Overstory from Richard Powers, and there's this some phrase in the end, I don't really remember, with some character, but he's like looking outside, and somebody asks him if he's feeling alone, and he's thinking that you can't feel alone, like
Yeah.
inside life, like it's weird, yeah, that there was this thing of like, connection in a way, like
Right.
that. And then I remember going coming up to a creek, with a little creek with stones, and the stones, I've never seen that before. Like, you had this like typical river pebbles, but when you will already see that they were all like cracked. There are little cracks with the water like seeping in, no? And when you touch them, they would like crumble. They
Oh,
would just like
sure.
crumble. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Those like, they have a pebble and you touch it and it crumbles. And I don't know, that I don't know, that was kind of weird, because I felt like the the time thing, like the passage of time thing, like seeing rocks crumble. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think in general, the whole psychedelic thing, that's like what we're reading as well, like a lot of like it's playing with those relations of size and time, space, like things seem bigger or smaller or yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And I don't know, I just felt some connection with that like time thing, and yeah. And um yeah, well, I don't know, yeah, I feel that was like the thing that made me feel like, yeah, coming down to earth, kind of. And then from then on, the trip, the hitchhiking trip was, um I don't know, I felt really good, and it was like really, it was, yeah, I got more attuned to what was around me, like I had this feeling of being more in the world, not so much up in my head, because the only thing I had to worry about was like when it was getting dark, like where I was gonna
Totally.
put down my bag, like, and yeah, I think that. And then, yeah, also you get more used to the whole animal thing, like the having animals around you, seeing animal tracks. You kind of see that, okay, like, because you grow up, and you where I grew up, you grew up with this kind of like image of like wild nature being something like, um
Over here.
in over there and dangerous, like
Yeah.
there's wild animals and you go there and they will eat you. Yeah, kind of. So yeah, that
Yeah.
was.
So that's another, I mean, that's all really interesting. And that is kind of, well, first of all, it's another parallel between your and my early, or, our not necessarily early, but our just overall process of development is, for me, another thing that think I think the world would be very different if more people just had that experience of moving around in the world and sleeping wherever you happen to be, and just kind of navigating from that state where you're carrying everything that you're using, and you're just kind of out and about for a while. And it's like there's something about that, the lack of mediation, right? The sense of direct participation in the world just becomes very, it's pretty unavoidable. And there's a lot of, I spent years of my life just kind of doing that, because the moment that I started to experience it, I mean, I kind of like tended in that direction very heavily from very early on. I think the first time that I spent a night outside, I was 5 years old, and I ran away from home, and I
Yeah.
just like slept wherever. Um, but I really liked sleeping outside when I was a little kid, and I would like, camp in the yard and stuff like that. And then by the time I was, I guess, like 15 years old, I was kind of like, I wasn't traveling, but it was like a 7 mile walk to where I was staying, and from the town that I was in. And so a lot of the time I would just hang out with people throughout the day. And then when everybody would kind of disappear, I would just keep walking around at night, and eventually I just kind of lay down somewhere. And that, that basic, like without a sleeping bag or anything, kind of really experiencing those states of navigating these kind of contour, that range between like, this is uncomfortable and maybe good for you as a developmental experience, and like, this is going to kill you if you don't like go to a 24-hour diner and like get inside right now, and but that sort of, that way of experiencing, like, at first it just felt, yeah, it just felt like the default. It just felt like a function of my circumstances. I wasn't really trying to like have experiences. And then at some point, I was very aware that I was experiencing the world totally differently than most of the people in the towns that I passed through, as I progressed in age and started, hopping freight trains and hitchhiking around the US. And you start to however you want to articulate it, you're aware that your way of being in the world is like a fundamental distinction that kind of recapitulates, it's like the barbarians versus the state, the like the wild people, often you feel very like, oh, like we just accidentally stumbled into something that is like this ancient dichotomy that has pervaded human history for a very long time. And then at a certain point when I was 16
Mm,
and I was just kind of, somewhere in the middle of America, like yourself, I had had this kind of experience in the forest where everything really shifted for me. And immediately after, I was just, hopping freight trains around for a couple months. And at some point, I really started to feel like I was having an experience that directly recapitulated the initiatory experiences that were so, that like we know kind of like traditional societies are characterized by that I had never given any thought to. There were, one of the places I grew up had like a very strong sort of like new age community. And so they were always on about that, like, oh, our society lacks initiatory processes. So we have to go like play some like hidebound drums in the forest. And like we have to have like manhood
yeah.
initiations and stuff like that. And I was like, whatever, like, no, we don't. And then I had one on accident, but I was like, oh, this is real. And there's something really different about how I'm going to be in the world for having had this experience than the vast majority of people who haven't had it.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
opens all these doors. But also what is so fascinating about your experience is that, okay, so there's these themes that I think are totally central to like kind of what we're getting at, what we're researching in this project, like why some people are receptive to certain kinds of information and certain forms of awareness and others aren't, where this kind of, you've exited the hall of mirrors that this society places us in, this like developmental trajectory we get onto where we're very like stuck in our abstractions, we're very lost in a forest of symbols and all that stuff. And you've had this process of experiencing, it seems like these two themes, you use both these words, are so often really interrelated, which is like an experience of connection, but also an awareness of the complexity of everything that's happening, right? You experience like a direct continuity with life. And then this sense of its primacy, the sense that you kind of had this like very flattened representational sort of like experience of it, and all of a sudden it's real and it's
Yeah.
alive
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's actually happening. And it's like there's nothing to say about it. We can write whole books about it. You
Mm,
can be David Abrams and write an
mm,
entire, couple hundred pages about it. But until people have the experience, they don't really know what you're talking about. I can easily see how a book like The Spell of the Sensuous, to
mm,
somebody who just hasn't had the experience, it's just more words. And they might be
mm,
very pretty words and they might seem very
mm,
well reasoned, but like, do they really know? Probably not in a lot of cases.
mm,
But what is so interesting to me about your version of this experience is that in the psychedelic trajectory, there's so often a part, often kind of like in the initiation of the really profound experience, where there's some kind of spatial shift or an experience of journeying. People will go through a door into like the underworld or like climb a ladder into the sky or whatever. And yours, I think, is one of the only ones I've heard about where you're already in the sky. You're observing
mm.
the world from this totally disembodied,
Yeah.
the view from nowhere, the God's eye view. And so your initiatory threshold is back down into the world. And that's so cool. That's really I don't know. I haven't heard an account like that before. I'm not like I
Mm,
haven't read like thousands of accounts of like
mm.
either psychedelic experiences per se or sort of just more broadly like mystical experiences which seem to, recapitulate a lot of the same essential features. But yeah, I've read a number of accounts of people like journeying into the sky or under the ground or like going through some cave into like a different, but just never like where I was already was out in space and then I came back down. It makes perfect sense. It's a great, yeah, but that's very cool. It's very interesting. And I guess I wonder like, I mean, to me, I know that's how I define my life is in terms of, or the way I see the world is in terms of an experience that I had in a forest once that was a lot like yours in a lot of ways, or at least I would, whatever the actual content of the experience, those are the themes that I would say I kind of assimilated as this sense of direct connection with all of life. And then this sudden awareness of how much more the greater like complexity of the world that was like all around than I had ever really experienced before. This sense of, yeah, of exiting the map is a phrase we've been kicking
Yeah.
around, but it sounds like would you say that was that experience for you kind of like the pivot point, like the tr the transition?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah. There was like just now I was thinking about that there was like another like shift accompanying that came along with it, but maybe it was more conceptual, is that like that anthropocentric thing that like I
Yeah.
remember maybe that primed me because like just before like the trip I read Daniel Quinn's what is it called Ishmael.
Ishmael, yeah, yeah.
And I don't know, it made me think more about like where did we come from, like humans. I don't know. I feel like that's also a thing, like in high school, at least in mine, it was like a lot about history, not a lot of prehistory. Like you learn about a lot about what is it means, what is human, but you don't know, you don't look at the transitioning phase, kind of. You don't
Yeah.
look at where you come from, and that made me think more about where I come from. At the same time, also I remember seeing that documentary, was called Cave of Forgotten Dreams or something like
Oh
that,
yeah.
about like
Yeah.
one of the caves in France, and that stuck with me, kind of like, I don't know, like, yeah. And I think my view of human history, like on a time frame, just like got like broader and more integrated, kind of. And but then also, and that was that's more like connected to the trip and to the sleeping outside and all that. Like, and then this connection, like then you living in a world that is like inhabited and made up by other living things, and you see that and you feel it and you connect with it because you know, I don't know, you kind of aware of what tracks are down there because you want to make a sleeping space, but the spare tracks maybe, you know, kind of like that stuff. You just get like more connected with like the non-human world,
Yeah.
and I feel like this like, yeah, I think you talked a lot about that also, like that this suddenly like your little world, you see the world you had before as this like little very specifically
Small. Yeah.
human world,
Yeah.
you know, and then suddenly you see like the context. And yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
feel hmm?
Yeah. And so I think, I mean, right, that's this big question that I think I don't know. I mean, maybe there's just no satisfactory answer or there's no kind of like clear boundary because this question of kind of like what is anthropocentrism and biocentrism, like are they really just sort of an expression of this kind of broader form of awareness? Is it just like once you feel exactly what we're talking about, this sort of like direct connection with the world and this realization of its complexity is that maybe just kind of like intrinsically, does that place you into like a perceptual realm where you, I guess like would tend to feel more concerned with or affected by the impacts that this civilization is having on everything else that's alive, or is it this kind of, is it more distinct than that? Could somebody go through that kind of psychological shift and really really experience like an embodied sense of connection to everything around them and like really be aware of all this complexity that they had previously kind of overlooked or over schematized, but really not have any kind of, not be really like burdened by forests getting cut down and whales being slaughtered, or
But
like that question.
for me, it also like it didn't like change directly. Like it took some time. It changed like the like what is salient to me, like
Yes.
what uh and and that's more the point, I guess, like when you hear about something happening or you see something happening to the natural world, you just feel it more, I guess, after that,
Yeah.
after like a
Yeah. Yeah.
connection
Yeah.
connecting experience. And I remember that I was like a long time after that, even like I wasn't really into like I don't know, climate change and stuff like that. I had a little bit this view of the natural world as something. I was like one of these people that would say like, oh yeah, if like if humans die out, whatever,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Earth will bounce back. There will be some other species, some other like good shit. Uh, and and then I kind of like I think I was just like a lot of things coming together. I was like reading about system stuff, like system
Sure.
science, chaos theory and stuff like that. And I started listening to your podcast because I think I got to you through Daniel, probably from What is Politics, because
Yeah.
I was reading The Dawn of Everything, and I was like, what is this book? I don't know what. And then he cleared it up for me. Yeah, yeah. So and then I got to your podcast, and I was like, oh, this guy sounds like really reasonable, and he's like really concerned with what's happening to climate. I look into like some of the like papers that have
Yeah.
come out in the last years, like some Hansen and Steffens and what are like the typical stuff. And at the same time, I was like into that system stuff and understanding what a tipping point is, what a feedback loop is, what a bifurcation is, and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, this is looking bad. It's looking really bad. And yeah, and then this anxiety kind of also set in, and yeah, and I feel like I just like just the other day I took the car to go along a coastal route here, like since a long time, and it's all like Mediterranean pines going up to the sea. These like small, really small pines, and they usually really drought resistant. But
Yeah.
they were like whole hillsides where like a third of them was like brown, like
Dying.
dead,
Yeah.
dead.
Yeah.
They won't come back. And it's like what? Or the like the last time I was in Germany, like where I lived all around, it's like spruce plantations,
Oh, right.
and
Right.
they all like hectares and hectares. It's all dead because of the like the bark beetle thing, because of drought and like higher temperatures and stuff. Wow. It's just yeah, it just hurts so much more now. Like looking at I don't know, yeah, it's just like really yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, somebody else who I correspond with sometimes who feels like, I don't think I would say that well, I mean, they say that the podcast really shifted how they experience the world, but I think in particular the podcast led them to Ian McGilchrist, and they read The Matter with Things, and he says that, things are very different, that he could never sing before, and
Mhm.
now he's like making music, so like he's really in touch with like a different different aspects of himself and
Mhm.
different sort of like realms of experience. And, in this way we're talking about, he says that he was this kind of hyper, in these kind of, he inhabited these hyper linguistically based rational models of the world. And now he's in the
Mhm.
world and he says it hurts a lot more, but it's also a lot more beautiful. And I think
Yeah, yeah,
he's
yeah,
quite moved by that.
yeah. That's pretty much it. That's true.
Um,
Yeah.
How long ago was it that you hitchhiked, like across the United States and all that?
That must have been like 15, maybe
15 years.
2015 or something
Oh,
like
okay. Oh, okay.
that.
Um,
2015 or something like that.
when did you start
Yeah.
landscape painting?
Um, I I always painted, I guess, from like small on, and I always wanted to do art. And then in Germany, I didn't like get into art school, and I I didn't start like genociding people. No, and no, I reconnected to that in Oakland,
Okay.
but I wasn't painting landscape. I was like, I like painting. I was like, oh, what do I paint? That also is like a little thing that came with it. I guess I just like I feel like a lot of in art is a bit, especially in art school, it's all about the concept.
Yeah.
It's a lot about
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
concept,
Exactly.
and I just kind of like to paint like nice things, nice lighting situations, stuff like that that I visually found
Yeah.
like interesting. So yeah, I don't know. I was always thinking about what I want to do with my art, what I want to paint, and I don't know. It's just like I don't know. And then just I realized that it's just the most fun for me to just paint something that I see and be outside. I just like to have all my painting stuff in the backpack and just get out until like I find
Cool.
something that I find interesting and set up. And yeah,
Oh,
it's
cool.
just because I like it kind of.
That sounds really nice. Yeah. Yeah. I was impressed by, at some point a long time ago, I was doing some research about various kind of like early 20th century art move, like avant-garde art
Mm-hmm.
movements. And I was very impressed at some point to realize that in a lot of cases, these movements literally started with a manifesto. Like before anybody made a single piece of art, they were like, this is what this is all about and why we make this kind of art. And I was like, man, that's concept heavy if if anything is, it's like uh but yeah, I mean that's so so in that time since 2015, it's like you started landscape painting. You live in Spain now, is that
Spin.
correct?
Mm,
And it seems like you've been reading pretty widely, like this it seems like when I mean when did that because now it seems like you have a pretty comfortable, a pretty significant degree of comfort with just kind of reading scientific papers from a variety of disciplines and just sort of like building an understanding of the world through direct engagement with research results and stuff. Like where did that start for you?
I don't know. Yeah, I was always like science interested, I guess. And then after high school, I started studying stuff, but I never like got on with it. I did like a 2 semesters of philosophy and one of sociology and one of geography or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, but and then I also had like years and years where I was not reading almost anything, a little bit of fiction, and that's it.
Okay,
But
okay.
then I kind of I don't know how it started. I kind of got back into it, and yeah, I feel also like just like before that experience in the States, maybe I started reading more, and after that, more and more. Yeah, I don't know. I just got more interested again, like in how everything is like. I don't know. I'm just interested in how things connect, and yeah, I like to read a lot of like
Different.
different things and
Yeah.
see how it like kind of fits. And yeah. Mm.
Yeah, okay.
And
But so in a way it is sort of
yeah,
like that experience that you had provides kind of an experiential foundation or framework
yeah,
for asking a bunch of questions about how
yeah,
all this stuff is
yeah.
related interrelated.
Also, I think like something that happened, and I guess that happens to a lot of people, is like when I was in high school, like what we were taught in biology was like selfish gene, and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
in sociology, in philosophy, they made us read like Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes like two times or something like that. Everything was like really like I don't know, but and I remember that science, like for me being like the outside leftist guy, science was always used against me, kind of
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
oh no, but that's not how humans are. We are like selfish and whatever. And I was always like, oh no, that's a naturalistic fallacy and whatever. But now I don't know, my view of this kind of science of biology especially has changed a lot. And yeah, it just now it vibes so much more with my intuition kind of, and it makes it more interesting in a way as well. Like it's not like, oh, okay, yeah,
Totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like I was very, very pleased to see I'm reading this book right now called uh well the actual title is Dance to the Tune of Life, but the subtitle is Biological Relativity. And that's
mm, yeah,
so
you
it's
put that in the chat. Oh, yeah,
oh yeah, yeah, right. And so
um,
it's kind of just this like the core theme is like it's one way of sort of phrasing or looking at, like conceptualizing the what other people like West Eberhard have emphasized as developmental plasticity, that the phenotype changes and that alters the genotype rather than vice versa, at least a good deal of the time. Where he's just talking about multi-level causation. He's like every
mm,
level of biological organization interacts with and influences every other level. The arrow of causation always points in both directions.
yeah,
There's no privileged sort of frame of
yeah,
reference or, locus of causality. So relating that to like the developments in physics 100 years ago,
yeah,
that
yeah,
emerged as relativity. And so, great book in general. But one of
yeah,
the things that he said in it is, because I've been saying this for a while, where I think that biology is changing to the point where it's pretty safe to say that the majority of working biologists now really don't think that selfish gene theory is right. But the majority of the public still thinks that's what the
yeah,
majority of biologists think is happening. And so
yeah,
there's this real need for, like some storytelling projects about how life really works. But in this book, it's the first time I've heard somebody just say this explicitly, where in one of it, it's just like a note, but I'm going to read it in the podcast for sure, where he says, the exactly that the majority of scientists are no longer using selfish gene theory as like a coherent model of biology. And yeah, I think we're entering this new kind of like I would kind of like characterize it as a third major phase of biology. We kind of had like Darwinism before the so-called like modern synthesis or
yeah,
neo-Darwinism came along, right? And then we
yeah,
had the like after the discovery of genes and the role of DNA, we kind of had all those decades of the like, yeah, the like the gene is the sole locus of causation in biology. Everything is random accumulations of just totally, of purely like genetic mutations as the sole means of biological
yeah,
change. And now we're kind of into this new era of, where like the phenotype is reasserting itself and plasticity is again something that is can be considered. And I think that the stories that we tell about just like the world in general, like what we are and the kinds of societies we can have inhabit, I think really have to change. If that understanding of what organisms are becomes more prevalent, I think that carries a huge number of consequences with it. I think that these debates were never about what inform or these like schools of thought were never about what information was available. It was always about a worldview, right?
Yeah,
To whatever
yeah,
extent people were even
totally.
conscious of that, it was always about them asserting this one
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
way that
totally.
things have to be, you
Yeah,
know?
I remember like this sense that my professors, they always like talk like about mere biology, mere physics, you know, mere nature, and it's like what? Yeah.
That's a yeah, that's I'm also reading a book called I think it's called Quantum Questions, but it's an edited volume of all of the things that the first generation of physicists who kind of developed quantum mechanics had to say about like it's all their mystical writings. It's like just what they had to say
Yeah,
about the nature of reality. And
yeah.
that's one of the things that one of them points out that I've always been so baffled by is like, how do we, what do we mean? Why do we do this thing where we say like, oh, it turns out that cognition is nothing but the activity of all of these like cells that are all like have their own form of awareness communicating in a connected network that consists of like 10 to the 17th power like interactions or whatever, and I'm like, why say merely or
Yeah.
nothing but before something so amazing, but there's like some things happening there. There's some project of reductionism that goes beyond explanation where it's like really important for people to kind of like devitalize the world or like rob it of a sense of wonder or something, there's
Yeah,
something
yeah.
happening.
It's something with control, no? I guess like that a
Right.
culture that instilled so much that this is mere nature, mere animals, you know, that's just like something you can control
Yeah.
differently than something, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have a lot of like cultural like narratives about that, no, in our culture, I guess. Like,
Right.
yeah.
Right. The last thing that I felt at the outset of this interview that I wanted to make sure to ask about was something we've talked a little bit about where the transformative experience that you described, um I mean, it's interesting, like when I had what I consider my version of the experience that you had at the time, I really didn't place it in any kind of I was very like hostile to notions of spirituality, right? I really didn't like that stuff. I considered it like the realm of people who, for whom the world isn't enough, who need there to be some kind of like magical, like transcendental force at work for things to be interesting. And I was like, that sure ain't me. And like a lot of that was just sort of the like cultural exposure. It was just like what I had been exposed to in terms of like what people meant when they said a word like mystical or spiritual or anything like that. And honestly, I was willing to embrace a fair amount of paradox in that regard because like one of the very first, I mean, within a few days of that experience, I picked up a copy of Black Elk Speaks, which is a book that I have carried around this world with me ever
Mm.
since and read many times. And I was like, oh, okay, this is a form like what I just experienced. This person also experienced some like version of, and I mean, it's overtly spiritual. He's like going up into the sky and talking to thunder beings or whatever. But at the same time, I was really like just like really not interested in using those terms, and that in that respect I was very typical of the kind of like the radical environmental movement that I was a part of. It's like I've looked back on how we talked about and experienced the world and said that it was very much like a sort of non-supernatural religion in a way. Like we were really all
Mm.
pretty hostile towards notions of like ascendant fairy beings that were like the generators of the forest or anything like that.
Yeah.
But we did really approach it with this sense of reverence and direct connection that I now have come to understand is how people characterize in a lot of other contexts, like spirituality or whatever. And So I'm interested in how you've talked about this being kind of like the experience of like sort of direct connection with the world can be thought of really as sort of antithetical to a lot of those sort of transcendental ideologies where, you're looking at everything from above, and there's
Mm,
some like emergent quality to all of this that isn't, it's not the actual trees and the actual like alive, like living movement on the forest floor that matters. It's some kind of like, abstract construct of what that all means or what it generates or what generated it or something. And so I'm curious about like how you feel about, like, do you feel like you would characterize any of your experience of the world as like relating to what other people in other contexts would call like mystical or a religious experience or anything like
mm,
that?
yeah. How to start? Well, I think I was always like really like open to spirituality in my life. Like before that experience, like I was into like meditation. I read like about Buddhism and other um, uh, mystical traditions, and so and like in terms of a worldview, I think I was more on the idealist side in the philosophical sense that
Oh,
like
okay.
the the idea is what drives the material kind of,
Yeah. Yeah.
like might before matter kind of. I think I was more in that field. I know like before the experience, and and that changed after that, I guess. I think I feel more materialist in that sense, that
Hmm.
I feel like um that I give more primacy to the physical world, I would
Yeah.
say. Like I I also I think that that was part of this whole thing in the trip, thinking like feeling or thinking about death, like feeling part of nature and at the same time like realizing being part of this process that you will get eaten,
Yeah.
like so also like the thought in an afterlife or something like that. I Before that I didn't entertain it as neither, but I had it like open, like something could happen kind of, and now I'm like, oh no, this like this kind of me, this is like there will be stuff happening that isn't me kind of, and
Yeah.
um yeah, and I remember like talking to a lot of like people after that, because like a lot of people you meet like traveling are more like kind of hippie kind of like new agey kind of people, and a lot of them like didn't understand. They were like, oh, so you don't believe that something of you lives on and some part of soul or whatever? No, I feel like I kind of like also um I I think, and that goes maybe back to the thing that you said before about like it hurts more, but it's also more beautiful. Like
Yeah.
like uh, I kind of I kind of accepted that this world is all that is, but that also says that this world has the ability to bring forth all this that is existing, all the beauty and stuff like that. There's no other transcendental realm that needs. I feel like I just like, yeah, I stepped out of that dualism in a way, kind of like, I don't know. Also, I feel like later I became like really sensitive to I think that a lot of new age people pass uh, pass like indigenous mythology with their like very Western lens, where you live in a world that is made up of an abstract and concrete world, like a spirit and like a transcendental and a like world, and they think that when an indigenous people talks about a spirit, that is something that belongs to the transcendental world that is apart, you know. But I don't think that this is the case. I think that this difference is something that in our culture has grown, you know, like that difference between these two worlds, and like other cultures use or talk about spirits, and it's something that exists, but it's something that exists in this world, not in some transcendental realm that
Yeah.
lives a part of, you know, like yeah.
I right. I think I feel similarly. I think that for me, what I was so resistant to was the notion of like a dualistic, disconnected, ascendant realm of any kind. I have, in a way, moved more towards, in a way, I've become more of a kind of like pan-psychically oriented kind of person, but that it has less to do with, it's important to me that there's not a disjunction. And I definitely know what you mean. I mean, I think it's very, I guess maybe that's another sort of defining aspect for me of this kind of like narrow path towards a certain set of realizations about the world that we're talking about, is that I think very frequently it involves some quality of divesting oneself of comfortable stories that like provide a retreat from certain sort of forms of emotional intensity or senses of, and there's a sense of accepting something that feels kind of painful, or that you could imagine creating like a mental construct to sort of not engage with entirely. But then there's also this profound liberation that comes with that. There's a sense of, and again, that's like a very multi-level thing. That's to
Yeah.
me very much how it's felt to get past some of the really intense trauma responses that I inhabited for a lot of my adult life. A sort of like finally realizing the full extent of the horror of those experiences and just letting that flow over me. And then at the same time, realizing that it suddenly doesn't have the power that it used to, because it's it has in fact flown over me now.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, that's in there somewhere for sure in this model we're trying to build of why people are aware of what
Mm,
they're aware of. But yeah, I've kind of, it's like I don't have a definitive sense of this, but I've increasingly come to this notion that there that the origin of life might be situated in this kind of agency that matter has at very small scales of organization towards this sort of like greater and greater self-organization that we see. It sort of, seems to provide the broad
mm,
overarching theme of this world we're inhabiting is, and whatever that is, I think that it might come about that someday we realize it as a form of like really diffuse consciousness that is sort of everywhere, and that our consciousness is just kind of one permutation of that, probably
mm.
like a lot more, it's maybe very concentrated, like all of these neurons talking to each other simultaneously.
Yeah.
I think like this might be more conscious than this, I
Yeah.
don't want to actually tap the microphone, but
Yeah.
like, but that there might be some level of what's happening here also happening here, and that's the
Yeah.
only
Yeah. Yeah.
reason
Yeah.
that this can happen. That
Yeah.
kind of thing is starting to feel a lot more. Whereas I used to truly feel that consciousness was solely an emergent property of brains, now I kind of think there might be a diffuse prototypical form of
Mm,
it in all matter, and that
yeah.
that might have something to do with
Yeah.
why life
Yeah.
happens.
No. No. I've also come to like in the last years soften that materialism and like have those ideas, and I think that yeah, it makes a lot of sense as well. Like for me, I don't think of it as panpsychism in that sense, because it like also I think like a lot of people are like, whoa, psychism, it's like such a big word. Like
Yeah,
but I feel like that everything, like even an electron, has like some sort of experience.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
because it's something that's relative to other things and that's influencing other things, and that we are some way of channeling this sort of relational experience
Right.
into something very complex that then has agency and starts to do all these weird things. And
Yeah. And that's yeah, totally. And that actually reminds me of one other thing that I was hoping to touch on real quickly with you, which is just that like I think that in this conversation, one of the things that some form of this emerges for me over and over again, where it's like we've noted all of these themes that that overlap between our experience that seem like they're really important for engendering this certain kind of awareness. There's all of these human potentials out there, but it seems like responsiveness to the crisis that the world is in right now requires one sort of very statistically small realm of that possibility of those possibilities,
mm,
and that indeed we see in people's development that there's kind of a narrow path, that it seems like there's a lot of experiences that not everybody is having that turn out to be pretty crucial to people in their stories about how they get here. Like not everybody does hitchhike around or hop trains around a big country for a long time, or like spend a lot of time sleeping outside, or have these. I mean, a lot of people just don't even ever really go into the forest ever under any circumstances.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so a thing that I wonder about is in the course of doing this research, like if we can think about experiential frameworks that we can like make accessible to people, or somehow like trying to essentially like promote. I think it's less about promoting like the kind of awareness that one possesses, and more like trying to give people some sort of path to their own process of developing these kinds of awareness. But I wanted to ask about we'd been talking about these meditations that
Mm,
are like kind of in this realm
mm,
where it seems like there are ways to sort of like deliberately access some of these distinctions. And
mm.
so one of them that you were talking about being really interesting, that I just wanted to hear about your experience with, is like this meditation of it's about like focusing on something really of like really small scale, and then kind of expanding your awareness out, right? Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I just got it from what you posted there, which I guess comes from Ian McGilchrist. No, you described it as like being focused on one point of your vision, and like trying to focus on the details, see as much detail as you can, and then start to expand that point, like
Right.
expand your focus of vision, but at the same time stay with the detail, kind of like no.
Yeah,
And yeah,
yeah, yeah,
I've been doing that quite a bit. Yeah, and I think it's interesting because yeah, it kind of has like some similarities to like psychedelic, like low dose psychedelic, like
right,
visuals, in that sense that that you see more detail. Like
right.
actually, like I mean, like I think it 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 was kind of hard first, and now I've been doing it like kind of every day, and I get more awareness of my field of awareness as well, which is kind of interesting, which is kind of nice to like know if you're looking like focused on one thing or you're like broadly open.
Yeah,
And yeah, I don't know, I think something that seems to happen in the brain, or I don't know, is something like that you, by focusing on detail, you kind of let go of your priors, no, of your what you believe is there. You kind of like ask the world more
yeah,
questions, kind of like, and at the same time you're trying to expand it, and so you kind of overload it in a way, I think.
right.
And that makes it like that you start just to see like a lot of detail, and you don't like focus on the thing itself. I think it just probably what happened is that through painting, I already have like a lot of connection with my like visual system now, how I
Yeah,
use
yeah,
it. But I've actually I meditated a lot, but I haven't done a lot of like visual meditations. So that was like the first like really like visual meditation.
yeah.
And maybe that just something connect was some two things connected for me, and because of that it feels like really interesting. And I feel like it yeah, it gives me more control about my attentional focus, so I can shift it better that way, kind of like, yeah.
That,
And yeah,
that makes a ton of sense, right? I mean, that would be exactly like in the like free energy landscape model of the brain or whatever, right? Like relaxing the top
the
down
top down,
model
yeah.
that you already have of the world and just kind of giving more primacy to direct sensory input. And yeah,
Yeah,
so it's at some point I want to I guess like create some kind of media that's about with like a collection of these kinds of exercises
not
that
this, yeah.
I'm exploring. So that's super interesting to me to hear. I definitely have to just check it out myself. I've never
Mm,
actually tried it. I've just read about it. One that I have been doing some that again, it's a, with all, I think with all of these modes, it's like at first you try to shift your attention and your perception in a certain way, and it's like really kind of challenging for a minute, and then it starts to become more intuitive. But I was reading these papers. One of them was that Michael Levin paper you sent me about oh, I can't remember the title right now, but in it, it's about developmental bioelectricity facilitating like multicellular life. And in it, he talks about what it's like to be a pancreas, right? And then
mm,
another thing that I read recently was this the speculation that some neuroscientists are engaged in that because octopuses actually have a greater density of neurons in their peripheral nervous system than they do in their central nervous systems in their brains, that each arm is kind of like an independent field of consciousness, which is cool, whatever. I don't know
yeah.
if it's true, but I liked reading it. But so like I've been kind of like thinking in those terms where it's like, so am I my brain or whatever, and trying to like really ask that question about what the experience that different systems in my body are having, and to like really, really, really just have the primary experience of the rest of my body, to just like perceive from my stomach and from my lungs and so that's very different than like the meditation thing where it's like, oh, do a scan of your body or whatever, because that's still your mind asking, it's still like asking here what everything else is experiencing. But it's like,
Yeah,
what is the experience of the whole world of this entire field of stimulus? What is this experiencing?
from there, yeah.
And
I see, I see.
I have had like so I've been trying that out, and I have had some moments of some really like, oh whoa, like these real
Yeah,
like sudden kind of ruptures from the status quo, from the
yeah,
state of affairs. So that's another
yeah,
one that I'm
yeah. That's good. I that reminds me of like a thing I read on Twitter. Somebody said, but it made so much sense to me, and it like changed my meditation. Actually, it was like, don't meditate on the body, meditate with the body.
yeah,
Like it's not like
exactly.
this
Yeah,
thing. It's like from inside out, kind of. Yeah.
yeah,
Mm,
exactly. Exactly.
no,
Yeah,
no.
that'll be, I don't know. Right now I'm just kind of putting them into fiction. Like I'm writing fiction right now about like a way that science develops in some hypothetical future society where like as evolution progresses, we become more and more able to kind of like directly communicate with, it's kind of like inspired by, there have been a lot of major scientific breakthroughs where people just kind of had visionary experiences, like call it what you want, but like sudden moments of like really intense
Yeah,
integration. Like Kukule discovered the structure of benzene because he had like the vision of the serpent devouring its own tail or whatever, like the ring structure of benzene, stuff like that. So it's
mm,
like about this future where that's like there's a deliberate process that scientists use to like
used to
have
do it.
these
Okay,
visionary experiences and like figure stuff
yeah,
out. Um, and so I'm putting some of these like meditations that I'm kind of like thinking might be
yeah,
useful in this fiction, but at some point it
yeah,
would be interesting to just like see, because not everybody can go like hitchhike around for a few
yeah.
months or whatever. It's
No, clear. Oh, of course, yeah,
there's a way to short
yeah.
circuit that.
It's okay with yeah. The thing what I was thinking about the other day was like most of the psychedelic research is like in a clinical setting, no? Like they inject and yeah, they have music and stuff like that. Also, your wait, I think your audio just went.
Can you hear me?
Oh no, yeah, yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Maybe that has to do a lot as well with what people perceive, because like then yeah, all like the high level stuff breaks down, but maybe you get more interaction with like your limbic system, with your feelings, memories, and stuff like that. And maybe when you do it outside, you get more connection with your like sensory modalities and like what you see, what you feel, what you hear. And yeah, I think that's like the setting thing, or just I feel like in general, like being immersed in nature is something that we have to look on, because it's like breaking down this like this like loop with like looking only at human stuff, looking only at stuff with low complexity that's easy to to absorb and to manipulate and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I have been really struck by that aspect of psychedelic research as well. I'm
yeah,
kind of surprised. I guess it is the sort of like disappointing development you would expect of this society, but I'm like surprised that
yeah,
that all of the research seems to take place in these like fairly barren settings of like actual like in a lot of cases like stimulus deprivation, like even like putting on the blindfold or whatever, and it's like just go into the like, and I'm like,
yeah,
like I don't know if that's where it all lives.
yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
something. I think that's also something cultural that we have that might play a role. That we we always mm, we always conflate like the mystical stuff with the inside, with like going inside. You
exactly.
know, like
Yeah.
there's not a lot of like outside and connection and like communication. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
I
I mean
think it's
that's
a cultural thing. I don't know. Yeah,
I think so, and it really the dialogues that we've had here, but also, just like in the World Tree server and stuff
mm,
about this question of like what are we're definitely talking about these very similar, like this kind of experience, but then it's like depending on how one conceptualizes mysticism or spirituality, it's either like a mystical experience or an anti-mystical experience,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's
It's
either, and it really highlighted for me the need for a more, like so many things, a more refined terminology where things mean something kind of specific,
mm,
where it's like we need terminology for the sense of identification, the sense of continuity with the world, the sense of identification with the whole like rich complexity of everything that's happening around you versus this sort of like, yeah, this like inward and upward sort of journey into like the
mm,
transcendental, high level, disconnected, schematic ghost
mm,
self, whatever. It's like
mm.
these are two
Yeah.
different things. And the fact that people use the same words to refer to both of these processes is like, it's not help. I just think it's really
Mm,
not helpful. Yeah.
mm,
But I don't know of anywhere where this isn't true. I don't know of anywhere where language isn't just used in a really confusing
mm.
multiplicity of ways, like
Ah, yeah. That's like the thing with language, It's like it's useful to
to an
to
extent.
communicate, but then it's also like yeah, it's always compressing and always like, yeah, compressing information, cutting off information. And we forget about that a lot, I think. That yeah.
Yeah, I really wonder if this is like if this is something that's amenable to I don't know, like reform or whatever, because I mean, I even
Yeah.
somewhere in my desk drawer, I have this paper that is a handful of biologists talking about how in evolutionary biology, a bunch of very, very commonly used terms, things like altruism, reciprocal altruism, kin
Mm,
selection, like even sociality don't actually mean the same thing
mm,
across like a huge number of
mm,
papers. And they're like,
mm,
hey guys, like
mm,
before we have arguments
mm,
about this stuff, we should like have a standardized terminology. And it just really makes me wonder, yeah, is that like just such an intrinsic feature of language that we have to kind of accept the limitation and the big lesson is just not to get too lost in language itself? Or is there some possibility that we could kind of press the reset button with some of
mm.
these terminologies? And I mean, obviously, politics is another realm where, the same words mean so many different things to so many people. And I very frequently think about, I'm not really interested in using any of the existing nomenclature because it has so much baggage, so many
Yeah.
accumulated meanings. And I'm like, is it meaningful to try to just, coin neologisms that have like very specific meanings? Or is it not? Is the same thing just going to happen really fast? I have
Yeah.
no idea.